Hey everyone, my name is Lizzie, and today we'll be talking about 12 colossal mistakes you do not want to make when homebrewing. My first colossal mistake on this list is my most recent one, and it's when I wanted to add fizz to my homebrew, so specifically cider. And what I wanted to do is, instead of adding just a little bit of sugar to the wash, I wanted to put it in a soda stream. So for those who are not aware of what a soda stream is, I have a machine here. This is the beautiful machine, and what we do is that we put a can of gas or a can of CO2 in the back of it, and we just have to press this button here. Once we press the button, there is gas that is going to come out of here and into the bottle. Usually when I use this, I do it for water, and I have a water bottle. So you have to use the SodaStream water bottle because the top of the water bottle matches the top of the SodaStream. And what you have to do, you just have to replace the water here by the alcohol that you have. Just have to turn it to make it fit. There it is. The bottle is nice and tight, and once we press this button here, bubbles will start to appear, and I like to press it 5 times because I like a lot of fizz in my water, and so that's what I wanted to do with my cider. And once you remove the bottle, you should hear a little fizz. So it's a little smoky. That's the goal. And in order to add fizz to my alcohol, let me just give you a little demonstration. So I have cider here, made by my class, and if you'd like to book a class, the link is in the description below. We'll show you different ways to make beer, cider, and wine from scratch. So I put this inside the SodaStream bottle, and I did the same process. So once it's filled up with cider, and I put it inside the SodaStream machine, pressed it a few times, and as soon as I removed the cap, everything exploded in my face. Just like when you shake a can of Coke or when you shake a can of beer, everything went all over the place. So this is something that you do not want to do when adding fizz. Do not use a SodaStream. I repeat, do not use a SodaStream. I had to clean up the mess. It was everywhere in the kitchen. There was fluids. There were liquids splashing all over the place, and it is not pleasant. Another mistake of homebrewing, speaking of sodas, is using sodas for your fermentation. And I know that some people use water and sugar. Other people use juice for their liquid base. And I tried to use Coke just to know how would that taste like, and it ended up not working because there are ingredients in the Coke that inhibit the yeast, and therefore the yeast wasn't able to thrive and eat the sugar that was present in the soft drink. Therefore, I would suggest, instead of using these types of drinks, to go with the regular juice or water and sugar. Just make sure that your liquid has a content of sugar for the yeast to eat. A third mistake that I've done in the past is to put my fermenting jar in a cold area. And this was in my humble beginnings. I would put my fermenting jar in the kitchen, in the cabinet, and I was wondering why it took so long for it to ferment, why the yeast was not eating much sugar. And this is because once the yeast is in a cold environment, it just seeps to the bottom of the jar and does nothing. It doesn't eat much sugar. Therefore, you want to keep it in a warm environment, roughly 26 degrees Celsius. You can leave it in your living room where there's light. However, they say not to leave it in direct sunlight because this may lead to off flavors. So drop a comment below if you agree with this statement and you want to avoid direct sunlight in your homebrew. The fourth mistake I've done in the past is not considering my proportions. So this happened initially when I added sugar into my wash, and I was experimenting. I wanted to know what recipe was the best, and I added a ton of sugar. And one way to measure your quantity of sugar is with your hydrometer. The link is in the description below if you'd like to purchase one. And this hydrometer, you can use it with a cylinder, and you can put liquid in the cylinder and then drop the hydrometer in. And the higher that the hydrometer floats, the more sugar is present in your liquid. The lower it floats, the less sugar is in your liquid. And after my first batch, I added so much sugar that the hydrometer was floating really high and it was no longer on the hydrometer scale. Therefore, I had to dilute my proportions. I had to add more water, remove the present sugar in order to balance it out. And once there's too much sugar, it's not good for the yeast because it gets stressed and there's just too much sugar to eat. Therefore, once the yeast is stressed, it can lead to off flavors. So too much sugar is not that good either, even if you have a sweet tooth and you prefer sweeter alcohol like dessert wine or sweeter beer. I'd also like to say with the proportions that initially I've added too much water, and my fermenting jar is 5 liters or 1 gallon, and I added 5 liters of water inside my pan. However, I had to take into consideration the sugar that was going to be added after. So nowadays I only add 3 liters of water when I want to ferment in a 5-liter jar, because I have to leave way for the bubbles that will appear during fermentation and the extra ingredients like the sugar, molasses, or anything else that you'd like to add inside your wash. Something else about proportions is that I've noticed once that I had to back sweeten, and what back sweetening means is that your alcohol is done but you want it to be more sweet. Therefore, I added sugar halfway, and once you add sugar into your fermenting jar, more bubbles will appear because the yeast is still present, and yeast plus sugar is not only going to give you alcohol, but it's also going to give you CO2 in the form of bubbles. Therefore, I added sugar into my fermenting jar midway, and it overflew. I had to clean the whole mess. I would suggest just adding sugar gradually if you're back sweetening your wash. My 5th mistake that I've done in the past is in regards to beer making, and this is when I use powdered malt extract. And what this replaces your malt, so you don't have to use necessarily the grains of the barley. You can just use powdered malt extract. And what this is, it replaces the sugar present in the grains. And what I did, I mixed it with the water, and I did not stir it for a while, and this caused the mix to overflow everywhere, and I had another cleanup to do. There's a common trend on cleaning up, and I just want to avoid any unpleasant surprises and keep everything inside your jars and your pans as it should be. Side note is that I also tried making beer with liquid malt extract, and personally the powdered malt extract is more prone to overflowing compared to the liquid one. The liquid one, I stirred it, and I find that the powdered malt extract, you have to stir it more often because there are risks of overflowing, and this happens to everyone, beginners and expert homebrewers alike. A 6th mistake is adding fruits to my wash, and I wanted to add banana flavor. I've tried adding banana flavors to give it a little hint of banana. However, if you leave it in your fermenting jar for too long, the fruit becomes rotten, and the taste of the rotten fruit affects the rest of the fermentation, and your alcohol at the end will taste like this rotten fruit. Therefore, it's not recommended. And another time I've added fruit was adding lemon. I just wanted to give it a little hint of sourness, and this did not go well either because the lemon is acidic and it made my wash more acidic. And once the pH of the wash decreases below 5, the yeast becomes uncomfortable and they're not able to eat the rest of the sugar. Therefore, you want to keep your pH levels at roughly 5.2. In order to fix this issue, once I added lemon, I had to add baking soda to make it less acid, and I added too much, and there's a video here on what happened next. So basically, once I added that baking powder, I had to add a lot for the pH to go back to 5, and I had to clean up a little mess once again. A 7th mistake is disinfecting your equipment with boiling water. So I have a fermenting jar that's made of glass. I know that some prefer using plastic, and the reason I use glass is that I want to keep my fermenting batches to 5 liters or to 1 gallon. I don't want to make too much at a time. This is a personal preference. I can make different types of flavors. And once I disinfected this jar, which is always at the beginning, you have to disinfect to avoid any bacteria, because yeast is a fungus and it thrives, and it might lead to more bacteria if your equipment is not sanitized. Therefore, in sanitizing, instead of using Star San, which is a popular product amongst homebrewers, is to sanitize your equipment, I used boiling water, and it broke my fermenting glass. So the bottom part fell off and I had to buy a new one. An 8th mistake is using the wrong yeast. So I started with turbo yeast. This is what every beginner starts with. And this is because the yeast package includes yeast nutrients. Therefore, the yeast will eat the sugar quickly, and you can make your fermentation in as quick as 24 hours. There are other turbo brands that can finish the alcohol production in 24 to 48 hours. The typical fermenting duration is roughly 1 to 3 weeks, and you can leave it more in order for the yeast to settle down or for the flavors to blend in. However, a lot of experienced homebrewers are walking away from turbo yeast because of the off flavor that it causes. And depending on what product you're making, you can use different yeast. So there are beer yeast. You can use Kveik yeast, for example, if you're making beer. You can use EC 1118 yeast if you're making wine or champagne. If you're making strong alcohol and you need a still, there's also a distiller's yeast that you can use. Another mistake, I wanted to imitate Bailey's, and in order to do so, I decided to ferment dairy products, aka milk. And I would not suggest this because when you're fermenting, you're leaving your jar out in room temperature for 1 to 3 weeks, and milk is prone to spoil in that temperature for those lengths. Therefore, I ended up throwing my batch. I wasn't courageous enough to try what was in there. Number 10 of idiotic mistakes that you can make when home brewing is adding the yeast when your fermenting jar is too hot. So why is it too hot? Because you do need to heat up your wash. Why? Because you need to dissolve the sugar that you've added. This is at the beginning, so before fermentation, when you mix your ingredients together, when you mix your water and sugar, or your juice and honey, any variation of liquid and sugar, and you need to dissolve it in a warm pan. That's for wine and cider. And for beer, you'll have to boil your ingredients because you have to boil the hops. The hops are what make your beer bitter. And in both cases, you're gonna have to cool down your product before adding the yeast, because when you look at the back of the package, in most cases, you'll see 30 to 35 degrees Celsius as an optimal temperature. Some other yeasts work best at 26 degrees Celsius. If ever there's no temperature at the back of the package, the rule of thumb is really using it when your liquid is at 26 degrees Celsius. If your liquid is too hot, it will kill the yeast and you'll have less yeast for the sugar. Therefore, the yeast will have to work that much harder to eat the sugar and to transform those sugary grains to alcohol. The 11th mistake that I've made is when aging my product, and I added oak chips because I don't have space for an oak barrel in my house. And oak chips, so I heated it up in the barbecue, made sure that it was toasted and had the flavors that I'd like based on this chart. Depending on the temperature, it'll give you different flavors of oak chips, but I added too many inside my batch. The alcohol just tasted like wood. It was not delicious, and it wasn't a hint of aged flavor. It really tasted like a tree. And a 12th mistake that I can share with you so you'll avoid making them is using unflavored Jello. I use unflavored Jello, however, I would say it's the quantity that I've used. So I just used too much and I didn't stir it well. The unflavored Jello, the point is to clear your alcohol, trap all the yeast particles together and drag them to the bottom of the jar. However, the whole batch ended up having a Jello texture. I did not choose to eat the alcohol Jello. However, for next time, what I would do, I would use half the package of Knox or unflavored Jello, stir it in hot water, and then pour it inside your alcohol. So make sure you follow the instructions and do not use too much, and your alcohol will be cleared. For other tips and tricks to clear your alcohol, you can always put it in the fridge. The yeast will seep to the bottom, or you can use clay. Personally, I would not use clay. However, it's another method that home brewers use. And if you have other tips on how to clear alcohol, drop a comment below. If you found this video valuable, share with a friend. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.